their development concept. So what can you expect during our virtual neighborhood meeting tonight? You can expect a presentation from the applicant's representatives that just describes their proposal. You can expect a brief overview of the city's review process and timing from myself. And you can expect an opportunity to ask questions of either the applicant or city staff and provide comments or identify concerns with the application. What you shouldn't expect is any city staff recommendations on the application or any kind of detailed analysis on the proposal, as this will occur later in the review process after a formal submission has been submitted. And you shouldn't expect a debate on the merits of the proposal between city staff or the applicant. So once we move on to the Q&A period after the presentation, if you wish to ask a question or provide a comment, you will be required to use the meeting controls to raise your virtual hand. You can find the raise your hand button and other meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. For those who are joining us by phone, you may press number 9 to raise your virtual hand. And when you're called on to speak, you can press number 6 to unmute yourself. You will be called by name to speak. You will then need to unmute yourself, and then please clearly state your name and address, and then provide your comment or question. As participants cannot see who's in attendance tonight, I'll just give you a quick overview that the total number that have registered for this evening's meeting is 57, I believe it was, last count. And that I believe 2 councillors are in attendance, Councillor Riepma, as well as Ward Councillor Elwin. So as we work, there's a number of people, so as we work through some of the questions and comments later in the meeting, I would respectfully request that members of the public please avoid repeating the same questions and comments. Once a specific matter has been identified, it will be documented and the applicant will either provide a response verbally at this evening's meeting or provide a response later in the process during a subsequent public meeting or in a written format through any subsequent submissions for their development application. This approach will allow us to have a more productive meeting and to hopefully conclude the meeting as scheduled at 6:30. Please also note that there is a chat function, and this is to be used if you have any technical issues with the Zoom platform specifically. For any questions regarding the application, the development application, please raise your hand and ask your question to the presenters. Questions will not be answered in the chat as it isn't visible to all of the participants. Those that have registered for the meeting by providing a mailing or email address will be added to the mailing list to receive further information about the application as it becomes available. So we'll just jump into kind of the next steps kind of before we get into the presentations about the application specifically. I just wanted to kind of quickly highlight a little bit of the planning process. So the city is, well, actually, the city and development team are currently in the initial stages of the development process. A pre-application consultation has occurred with the city, where a preliminary technical review with a variety of internal city staff and external agencies was provided to the applicant. After tonight's meeting, the applicant will incorporate comments received from this neighborhood meeting and submit their application for a zoning bylaw amendment. The zoning bylaw amendment focuses on creating a building envelope or the framework for which a building can be built within by establishing required building standards for the site, including setbacks, building height, density maximums, and things of that nature. Should the zoning bylaw amendment be approved by council, the applicant will subsequently submit a more detailed application for site plan approval. These formal submissions will occur a renewed review process where comments received from the city, from the city's technical groups and external agencies again, as well as member of the public will be incorporated. The neighborhood meeting is established early in this development process to ensure that local concerns are incorporated or addressed through the city's review. Following tonight's meeting and the submission of formal applications, there will be a public meeting with council. The public meeting is a statutory requirement under the Planning Act. Everyone who registered for tonight's neighborhood meeting, as well as all properties within 120 meters of the subject lands, will be notified of the public meeting. This public meeting will likely also be held virtually, similar to tonight's meeting, pending any updates to COVID-19 protocols. At the public meeting, the applicants will present the applications to council and again answer questions. At the public meeting, applicants generally identify that this neighborhood meeting has been held and provide an overview of and a response to the issues and concerns identified at this meeting. Members of the public will again have an opportunity to provide either verbal or written comments at this public meeting. Following the future public meeting, staff will continue a technical review process associated with the applications, and the applicants may make any necessary revisions to the proposal. Once the review process is concluded, a staff recommendation report will be brought forward to council for their consideration, and all comments received throughout the review process, including those received at tonight's neighborhood meeting and the future public meeting, will be identified and addressed in the staff report and will form part of staff's recommendation on the subject application. We'll now move on to the applicant's presentation. As I mentioned, the application will be presented first, followed by the question and comment period. So tonight, again, we are focusing on the proposed development concept, which will require zoning bylaw amendment and subsequent site plan approval for the property located at 217 Dunlop Street. Tonight, we have Nicola Mitchinson of Mitchinson Planning and Development Consultants, as well as Jerry Pilon from Salter Pilon Architects. So I'll hand over the meeting to the applicant who will introduce the project and begin their presentation.
Thank you very much for your introductory comments, Jordan, and for working through the meeting protocols. We're just transitioning to the slide presentation. Can everyone see the presentation clearly? Jordan?
Sorry, yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. As Jordan mentioned, my name is Nicola Mitchinson. I'm a registered professional planner and president of Mitchinson Planning and Development Consultants. I'm working in conjunction with Jerry Pilon, who is an architect with Salter Pilon Architecture. And we're very pleased to be part of a team representing the development at 217 Dunlop Street East. We've been involved in this project for a while. This is obviously the first public viewing of our proposal. So we're very interested and we're very excited to obtain feedback and comments from the neighborhood and from anyone else who is interested in this particular project. It's been a while in the works, as I mentioned, and we've given this proposal a very extensive and careful and thorough evaluation of issues and options. We've tried to balance a number of objectives, and in planning, some of those objectives can actually be contradictory to one another and in opposition, but we've worked our way through an extensive array of provincial planning policies and city planning policies, urban design guidelines, and very importantly, what is appropriate for this site within the context of the neighborhood. We feel that this development has to be complementary to and a critical component of a very important North Shore community, but it is also part of the City of Barrie's Urban Growth Center. So we're trying to balance those two objectives of high growth and intensification and respecting the needs, the issues, and the potential impacts of a high-rise development on the surrounding community. Hopefully, we have achieved a very good balance, but certainly we welcome your comments and your feedback because it's very important to the process. I think I'm driving this. As Jordan mentioned in his introductory comments, our planning applications are actually threefold: a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment, an associated application for site plan control approval, as well as a plan of condominium. The project itself involves a 15-story, 41-unit residential plan of condominium with a smaller commercial component. Many of you are probably familiar with the site. It used to be the former Cotty's Cleaners, and since that time it was purchased by the developer, PBM Realty, Peter Moore of PBM Realty, and the site has been remediated and approved for development through the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. We have a registered record of site condition and a certificate of property use. We as the development team and the developer are bound by the requirements of those documents in terms of developing the property in accordance with ministry requirements. Just a little bit on the developer. Peter Moore, you may know, is the owner of Moore Packaging. He's been a very active member of the Barrie community. The company employs a lot of people, and there is a strong level of community commitment and investment within the Barrie community and surrounding area. As I mentioned in my introductory comments, we've paid a lot of attention to how to properly develop the site and to ensure that it conforms with provincial and City of Barrie planning policies, that it enhances Barrie's Urban Growth Centre, or UGC, and that it complements the surrounding neighborhood and mitigates any potential impact on those surrounding uses. I know you're familiar with the site, so we didn't get into a site context plan in particular, but we wanted to show you a detailed site survey. It was prepared in May of this year. And just to orient everybody, the subject site is identified in red. We have Dunlop Street to the north, existing residential development to the north of that. Along the eastern property boundary, we have a single detached residence at 1 Kempenfeld Drive, which is also under the ownership of the Moore Group. To the south, the North Shore Trail, and obviously further to the south, Kempenfeld Bay. On the east, there's about a 7.5 meter wide portion of Sampson Street. It's an unopened road allowance, which currently contains municipal infrastructure. And just to the east of that is the Flamenco condominium, the 8-story condominium that was developed quite a few years ago. The property is about 0.2 hectares or 0.5 acres in size. It's not a large property. There's about 65 meters of frontage. You can see that there's a little bit of an angle on the property, so it's a bit irregularly shaped in that regard. But there's about 65 meters of frontage along the property itself and a depth of only 34 meters. And within that property, there's a fairly significant change in grade, about an average grade of 5%, oriented in a north to south direction. With respect to Barrie's official plan policies, you can, whoops, did I do that? I apologize. With respect to Barrie's official plan policies, on the left side of your screen, you can see the land use designations that are applicable to the subject lands, which are identified in yellow, as well as the surrounding area. The subject site and a lot of the adjoining lands to the west are designated as city center or city center commercial, and the lands, a lot of the lands located to the east are designated as residential. The right side of this slide indicates the limits of the City of Barrie's Urban Growth Center, and that is depicted here. So the subject property is certainly within the limits of Barrie's Urban Growth Center. In terms of the official plan policies, we've ensured that the proposal and the uses conform to the policies of Barrie's official plan with respect to uses. The city center uses allow and encourage a broad range of commercial and residential and institutional uses of which we comply. We've ensured that the urban design components comply with the urban design guidelines of the city's official plan, as well as with the tall building requirements. We've tried to ensure that there are opportunities for active connections between the development and the North Shore Trail. Obviously, we want to ensure that there's no negative impact to the North Shore Trail or to Lake Simcoe. So a lot of these official plan policy considerations have been factored into our design, and we feel we do comply with the city's official plan. For example, the urban growth center minimum density target is 150 persons and jobs per unit, per hectare, and we meet that and actually exceed it by a little bit. So we feel comfortable that we're in line with provincial and city directions in terms of intensification opportunities, but appropriate intensification opportunities, which I think is a really important distinction. A couple of other key considerations in terms of policy direction is the encouragement that policies encourage the reuse and remediation and redevelopment of brownfield sites, of which this is. And the policies also require that we use land and municipal infrastructure as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So again, we've tried to achieve those objectives and policy requirements within the site design. In terms of provincial planning policies, as you may know, planning in Ontario is a provincial policy top-down led system where the developments and planning applications are required to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, the 2020 provincial policy statement, and must conform with the 2020 growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, as well as other provincial plans. And in this case, the relevant provincial plan is the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. Again, we feel, it's our opinion, that we comply and are consistent and conform with these provincial policies. The site is located within a primary settlement area. Barrie's been identified and designated as a primary settlement area under provincial policies. It's been defined as an urban growth center, which is a focus for growth and intensification. The design itself is compact. It provides for a high density residential condominium form, as well as commercial uses. It uses municipal infrastructure effectively and efficiently. So you can see there's a lot of repetitive policy aspects between the provincial policy and the city policies that are relevant to this proposal. The development contributes to a complete community, healthy, livable, safe, sustainable community through high quality urban design, sustainable site and building design elements. We facilitated improved pedestrian access from Dunlop Street through to the North Shore Trail. And certainly the site will be serviced in accordance with best management engineering practices and standards required by the province and by the city and by the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority with respect to site servicing, stormwater management, and traffic. I'm pleased to say that there are no significant natural heritage features or functions on the site. We've had a natural heritage evaluation, there's no species at risk, and the project will not negatively impact Lake Simcoe. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my conversation or presentation, the site will be developed in accordance with its record of site condition and certificate of property use. In terms of zoning, the subject property, if you look on the left part of the screen, is zoned as transitional C2-1, which is a commercial transition zone. under bylaw, City of Barrie zoning bylaw 2009-141. And you can see the C2-1 zone in this area here. And on the right side of the screen, again, the zoning bylaw implements the official plan policies. Apologies. The boundary of the urban growth center is identified in the gray with the dark dashed line. The C2-1 zone permits a broad range of commercial, institutional, and residential uses similar to the official plan designation. And it's important to note that a 10-meter high or a 30-meter high 10-story building is a permitted use as of right on this particular property at this time. In order for the proposal to be developed in accordance with the vision of the developer and in recognition of some of the site constraints, and those site constraints I think I mentioned, it's not a very wide site, it's quite a shallow site, it's a small site, a number of exceptions or special provisions are required to facilitate the development. So this particular slide identifies the required C2-1 zone standards. They're identified in the first column. And in the second column are the statistics and the zoning components relative to the subject application. And when we discuss, when Jerry gets into some of the design components surrounding the development, you will hopefully have a better appreciation as to why these particular variances to the zoning standards are required. So the elements identified by a yellow highlight are those which require a special exception to the zoning bylaw. So for example, we require a reduced east yard side back, a reduction in the setback for a parking structure, a reduction in the side yard setback on the west side of the building. There is an increased requirement relative to the gross floor area. We're at 595%. I think probably of most concern to the residents will likely be the increase in height. As I mentioned, 30 meters is permitted as of right. This particular development is seeking 56 meters, which accommodates a 15-story building. Please keep in mind that part of that is due to the parking requirements associated with the property that starts to push the push the building upwards. We require some variances to how that height is determined in terms of its proximity to the front lot line. We don't have any flankages in this case, so it's more of a step provision in relationship to front yard setbacks. The proposal is reducing the amount of commercial space. The bylaw requires a minimum commercial allocation of 50% of the lot area, not of the building area, but of the lot area. In this case, we've reduced the commercial component to 20%, which roughly equates to about 4,323 square feet. We have a variable landscape buffer. 3-meter minimum is required. In some instances, the minimum is about 0.6. We've identified it as 0, but it is 0.6. But we also have areas where the landscape buffer is far in excess of the 3 meters. With respect to parking, I think this is important. We don't require an exception. We're actually exceeding the parking requirements. And I know that parking and traffic are also concerns of local residents. We're required to provide 41 residential parking spaces. In this instance, we're actually providing 114. 53 of those are typical parking stalls, but we also have opportunities in the building for tandem and stacked parking. So we're trying to maximize in-building parking for the residents. The commercial component requires 17 parking spaces. In this instance, the development is providing no commercial parking spaces, given its very close proximity to all the commercial activities and parking opportunities along Dunlop Street and the other north-south streets. And this particular reduction is consistent with other reductions granted to very similar development applications throughout the urban growth center. Now, the moment I think we've all been waiting for is an explanation around the design and the nature and the scale and the form of this particular building, because it is different from many of the applications that have been recently presented in the city of Barrie. I'm sure many of you have been watching with great interest. And I know Councillor Elwin has a very busy ward, being a lot of the growth center board. There have been a number of very extensive redevelopment proposals, massive heights, 34 stories, hundreds of units. And in this particular case, we are focusing on more of a luxury or boutique condominium, such that the number of units are 41 at this stage. So 41 units within a 15-story building. Jerry will speak to why that's the case. It's related to certain things such as private elevators to each of the units. It's related to the fact that each unit extends from the north along Dunlop Street fully to the south to Kempenfelt Bay. So the units extend the full range of the building footprint. So I won't steal any more of Jerry's thunder. And on that note, I would like to turn it over to Jerry Pilon to walk you through the architectural components of the proposed design. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Good evening, everyone. So, for many, this is the first time you're going to see the image of what's being proposed. And, as an architect, I hope you like it. Our design goal here with our development team was to kind of bring a brand new architectural addition to the city and within the urban growth center that set a high design standard. We wanted to be unique in that regard, pay some tribute to some heritage elements with cornices and other details, but also not move away from it being a new modern boutique development. I'll speak to some of the urban design guidelines we tried to achieve with it in a while, but really the whole idea of this was attention to design detail. And I can tell you that this building went through a number of iterations, and the development team really wanted to try and get it right. And we think we have. So we paid attention to parapets and, breaking down massing and heights. We looked at, lighting and making sure we maintained, no light pollution on the site. We looked at how we could, step the facade in some ways while not stepping back the entire facade, and doing that at the upper corners of the building to try and give that relief and that kind of perception from the street. We looked at cornice details, clean lines, lots of glass. And it's also, the whole thing is premised on quality materials and finishes inside and out. We're talking about limestone and specialty panels and curtain wall and, just nice features and granite accents and things like that will really make a difference, I think, to the overall quality of the design. We mentioned that this was being driven a lot by urban design guidelines and other site parameters. I think before I talk about the view from the bay, I will talk about a couple of reasons why we've taken this approach, both from this view and from the view from Kempenfelt Bay. The guidelines, we won't get into detail on them, but they really refer to issues around building and siting, and that speak to building facade and roofline and contributing to an active streetscape. And we think we've achieved that. It talks about pedestrian links, and I'll show how we've done that. And it speaks to being able to accommodate landscaping. So even on a tight site, we have accommodated lots of landscaping to soften the edges of the building. And we've provided, it asks for interesting architectural features. So I don't think this is a skyscraper tower. It has lots of unique and interesting features. It talks about parking. We've contained the parking. It talks about energy efficient urban design, things of that sort. And I won't go through them all. And I'm sure some of the questions that come up will require answers, and we hopefully have answers to those for you. And then the tall building sections also speak to, shadows and views and access to the bay, microclimate impacts and street level activity. But we'll walk through how and hopefully answer any questions that exist about how that's being impacted without going through too many details. But we'll move on to the next one, Nicola, please. And I think, this is the view from the bay. And I think, what you'll see is that the view from the bay is primarily about the view and the balconies and outdoor living spaces. As Nicola mentioned, I'll show you the plan shortly, but every unit has a view through to the north and a view through to the south, which is unique in this type of development. Usually you have the water views and the non-water views. Well, every unit in this building has a water view as well as a city view. And so we focused a lot of the spaces and developed the spaces that face the water, having large balconies. They're probably the largest outdoor living spaces and balconies of any development that's being proposed in the city right now. And just with great spaces for living and entertaining and just enjoying the city we have. So I think, that's really the things that we wanted to achieve with the design. And then we'll move on, because I know we have to, in the interest of time, not spend too much on this, but I'll let Nicola speak a bit about the context plans and the block plans that we have for this in the context of our overall development. And then I'll get into the details of the site plans with you in a minute again. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you, Jerry. All right, so moving along. Obviously, one of the key considerations is the building on the site itself, given the nature of the site, the nature of the immediate abutting and surrounding uses. But it's also important for us to look at that building within a broader context of a neighborhood, a community, an urban growth center. So the next couple of slides try to do that. They demonstrate, hopefully, that this is a mixed neighborhood that is comprised of low density housing, single detached dwellings, duplexes, triplexes. It's comprised of low rise and mid rise existing development, these general locations. And then we start to have some higher buildings, 6 stories, 7 stories. The Bay Club is 15 stories. Here is the proposed building at 217. The Flamenco, it used to be its own little, it looked big at the time. It was 8 stories when it was constructed many years ago. You can see that it's now has development proposals on both sides. The most recent being the approval of Lac House. That building is 10 stories, and I believe it's about 183 units. Our development is 41 units. This development is 183 units. Then, of course, as we head a little bit farther westerly, we're at Bayshore, another 15-story building. So it's easy to see within the context of this community that there are a variety of housing types and scales and massing. And that is again reflected in what we're referring to as a block plan. So in this particular angle, we're here and we're looking in a southwest direction. And again, it's just highlighting some of the mixed uses. Bay Club, Collier Terrace, the mid-rise, the low density, 15, 8, 10, 15, a mix of housing types, levels of affordability, built form. And then again, in this same slide, just a different angle of the relationship between these various types of built form. And we feel that the context of the community, the context of the neighborhood is very important as we evaluate the appropriateness and the relevance of the building that's being proposed. Jerry's now going to walk you through the actual site plan components, because again, it's based on built form, and highlight some of the key features from a site plan perspective.
So overall, I mean, Nicola spent some time speaking about the site, so I won't repeat a lot of that. But I think by way of context, when you try to look at, you know, when we talked about setbacks and provisions for that, there's a unique thing with this site, obviously. To the east, we have One Kempenfeld that is actually owned by the same ownership development group here. So our actual buffer and setback, not by technical zoning, but by actuality, is far in excess of the relief we're seeking here, as is the one to the west, because there's the unopened road allowance for Sampson. So, you know, for the site context, we tried to look at those features and try and move as much inward as we could while still being able to maximize the development. So I think, you know, for our frontage, we talked about, you know, the idea of a real perspective on urban streetscape already, and you can see how the site and the building on the site plan relates to the street, to Dunlop Street. And then you can see on this plan the kind of context of the building. That's the view from North Shore Trail and Kempenfeld Bay. And, you know, the little pieces that come out are the stair towers you'll see in the plan. But beyond that, we really do step back for landscaping, budding the building all along, as well as terrace landscaping to the corners and sides. We use the west side as a primary access ramp down into one of the lower parking levels that I'll show you in a second here. But it's also a provision for access to City of Barrie services for service vehicles. Which is an important thing. So we thought we'd try and marry those two aspects. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you know, we're just trying to show a bit of the context. This is a concept landscape plan, but it's really to try and show where the greenery will be in relation to the property line. And as you can see, there's lots put in at the edges. And there is that pedestrian link that comes down on the west side and the unopened Sampson Street road allowance that has a landscaping feature cascading down, and then featured trees and buffers along, you know, that we're trying to look at that I think make a lot of sense. So, you know, we're trying to capitalize on that in all ways we can. Next slide, please. I'll just go through these quickly because we focused a lot on the renderings and in the interest of time. But this is just the architectural elevation to show some of the detail and articulation on a straight on elevation. People tend to like the pretty pictures better than this. But it really just gives you a sense of the scale at the street with where we have the first step of cornices and pieces of that nature. And then it kind of shows again where the building tries to have the cornices. But I think the perspective model and rendering shows that better. Next slide, please. This is the elevation from the east. And this is really where we'll have, when I show you the next plans, you'll see where we have a ramp up to a parking level as opposed to the one down from the site plan. But once again, on the elevations, you know, lots of glazing, lots of balconies, outdoor space, things of that sort that, you know, are always a good thing. So moving through the plans quickly, I think what we want to talk about, you know, a little bit are some of the specialized features when we get to the floor plans. But when we're talking about the overall plans here, this is the lower level site plan or parking plan. So basically what we have here is a parking access ramp that comes down on the west side. We have access within the building, and then we have our series of parking stalls. Once again, some tandem, some stacked, as well as the elevator cores that Nicola can point out. So every parking level has the elevator cores that access directly from parking levels right directly into the units, and I'll show you how that works shortly. Go to the next one, please, Nicola. On this one, this is the kind of street level plan from Dunlop. This is where our main entrance is, as well as our commercial access point at grade on the west side of the building. Then on the east side of the site, we have the 2 access points for a access level into this level of parking, as well as the ramp that starts to go up to the level of parking above. And then of note is the location of the commercial space on the west side of that footprint of the building. Next slide, please. Once again, more parking. This is where the ramp comes in on the east side, as I mentioned, accesses into the additional parking areas, access from all the ramps. This is also where we have our secure bike storage within the building. But once again, we're over doing parking for all residents and exceeding the requirement. So we hope that that's a benefit. Then once again, our second level of commercial. But now we'll get into the units. Now I know these are hard to read in detail, but you know I don't want to get cut off by Jordan, so we'll go quickly. So this is the level 3 plan, and it's just a bit unique in terms of the stair configuration for getting access from the exit stairs. But I'll speak to that later. But let's move to the next one, which is a typical plan that has the 4 units. There are 28 units like this, and on 7 floors. As Nicola mentioned, each one has direct views north and south. Obviously, the ones at the ends have east and west views as well. The elevator cores get you access directly into your unit. They're redundant cores. One works for one side, one will work on the other, but with security access control. In the event of elevator maintenance, they can be used on either door. And so no one's left without elevator access to their unit, but they're always secure with entrance directly into the unit. And then, you know, these units are on the upper floors. They are, on these ones, we have 4 floors at 2 units each. And they have lots of the same amenities and features as the units that are 4 units per floor, but these ones are larger. The other ones were just over 2,000 square feet. These are just over 4,100 square feet. And they feature amenities, the 3 bedrooms, all with en suites, 4 bedrooms if you want, or a den office space, and large kitchens, dining, great room, wraparound balconies. The balconies have outdoor kitchens themselves, seating areas, vertical gardens, outdoor spa options. I mean, there's just lots of opportunities for what these units can do and be. And as you can see, large balconies that go out with views. And then this is the penthouse unit. There's only one of these. It's 7,400 square feet. I guess everything at the top is over the top. It's got the same as every other unit in terms of amenities and then some. Most of the spaces are bigger though. It also has a sauna and a media room, extensive outdoor balconies directly off the master suite. It has larger outdoor kitchen, green spaces. It even has a lap pool. You name it, it's got it. And once again, secure. I will use this to explain the stairs though. Each unit has where they're in line with the stair tower, has access to 2 points of stairs that gives us our dual exits out of each floor plan. The one in the penthouse is missing because we don't need 4, we only need 2. But that's how we get access down and out, you know, for emergency exiting and everything else to meet all the requirements of the building code. So that at a high level is, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm cognizant of time. I think we've gone way over our allotted time.
And I think I'm pretty much done that then, Nicola. I mean, I think we can go through any other questions if they come up, but you know, that for me kind of covered it quickly.
Thank you. I think if it's all right with Jordan, I'd just like to skip to one slide. As I explained at the beginning of the presentation, there are a number of technical reports that are required as part of our complete application. Those reports are in process. They've almost been finalized and will be fine-tuned based on our formal submission. I believe people may have questions about traffic and stormwater management. So I think rather than presenting that, maybe we can address them as part of the questions, because I don't want to cut questions off. But perhaps, Jerry, I'm going to go to the shadow slide, and you could just speak to that, because I think that's going to be an important consideration as well. So I'm just going to move there, and you can explain, and then I think we'll close our presentation and open the floor to questions. Is that okay, Jordan?
Yeah, I think that'd be great if we could. Just want to open it up to the community.
Yeah, I won't go through lighting studies and stormwater and all that. This is one I know that people are interested in. This is a study that we require to have as part of any application, and it tries to look at the context and the height of the building and the shadows it will cast. In terms of the shadow study itself, what it does is we look at the fact that the shadows will all be to the north, to the east, and the west. As we move north on this site, the grades all go up, so it does impact the length of how far the shadows are cast, mitigates it actually. So we look at it at both summer solstice with low shadows, and when the sun is low in the winter and winter solstice at various times of day from the east and west, to look at where shadows are cast. So that's really what these images are. And they're part of an overall shadow study report that we've done to look at how we investigate that. I think the big part of this, that was to say, as part of the guidelines, it says that we have to provide a minimum of 6 hours of daylight to all adjacent properties and mitigate impacts to parks and public spaces. And this building complies with that from a shadow study perspective.
Great, thank you, Jerry. I won't go into the summary because it essentially repeats a lot of what we've already said in terms of policy conformity and urban design requirements, etc. Jordan, will you talk about next steps after the, okay, so I'll just, there we go. So we certainly thank you for listening to our presentation, and we welcome your input and your comments. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you both. Appreciate the kind of detailed look at the site. I think that's probably helpful and hopefully answers several questions for the community. So we will now open it up to questions from members of the public. And I just wanted to give a reminder that if you wish to ask a question or provide a comment, please raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. You can find the raise your hand button and the mute and unmute buttons at the bottom of your screen. So for those who are joining us by phone as well, you may press 9 to raise your virtual hand. And when you are called to speak, you can then press 6 to unmute yourself. Please note, it will take a moment for staff to give you the permission to speak from behind the scenes. But once you are finished speaking, these permissions will be removed. So we will ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak and that you will be called on by name when it is your turn. So just another reminder to please state your name and property address before you ask your questions. And again, as we work through the questions, I would just respectfully ask that members of the public avoid repeating the same questions, comments, variations of a theme. And then once a specific matter has been identified, just please understand it will be documented and the applicant will either provide a response verbally this evening or provide a response later through the process during the public meeting or in a written format through their submission materials. All comments and responses will also be included in city staff's recommendation report that is brought forward to council later in the process. So this does become part of the record. So with that, I will maybe just go down the list here as I see them. And so I will call upon Ms. Liz Rabinovich, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you did. Well done.
Thank you.
I'd like to commend you on the design, the developers on the design of the building. One of the concerns that I have, sorry, we live 94 Clapperton Street. One of the concerns that I have is the magnificence of the windows, and wondering what mitigation practices you have in place to prevent bird strike. It's a phenomenally active songbird area, and those windows are going to be a little confounding. So have they thought about anything to mitigate that?
So I can address that briefly if I can. We haven't got into that level of detail on it yet because we haven't really detailed the full window makeup and the level of what the glazing is going to be and where we have any kinds of articulation on the windows themselves to try and mitigate that. I know that that's something when we work with curtain wall manufacturers that we do get into, and it is achievable. But it's obviously a balance, and so we have to look at what that is, and that's something that as we go through the next stage of the development process through site plan, we will look at that in more detail. But at this level for rezoning, it hasn't been fully considered, but it has been thought of.
Great answer. All right, thank you. I'll move down now to Edith Tracy.